Car accident had stolen half a month of my life. When I woke up in a hospital bed, there were no memories, only pain and confusion. But Thomas was there. He told me he was my husband, that he had stayed by my side through everything, and I believed him. For weeks, I thought I was happy, but it was all a lie. Tonight I had gone to his office, my heart racing with excitement. I had taken the test that morning, staring in shock at the 2 lines that changed everything. A baby, our baby. I couldn't wait to tell him. I pushed open the door to his office, stepping inside, then froze at the sound of voices. "So are you going to keep pretending to be her husband?" The voice wasn't Thomas's. It was his friend's. My breath hitched. What if her memories return? A pause, then Thomas spoke. His voice calm, collected. "They won't. She's been drinking the pills. Trust me." The world shifted beneath my feet. I made sure she wouldn't remember. He continued, "She can't. If she does, she might do something to harm Amber and stop her wedding." Amber, my sister. What is he saying? Why would I stop her wedding? My head was spinning, wanting to remember everything. She doesn't need to know the truth. Thomas sighed. Even if Amber didn't choose me, even if she married someone else, I still can't let anyone destroy her happiness. So if I have to lie my life with her, I'll do it for Amber. Betrayal surged through me, leaving me cold. I wanted to scream, to burst into that room and demand the truth. But I had nothing, no proof.
No memories.
If I confronted him now, he would have an explanation. He would smile, touch my face, and tell me I was imagining things. So I turned and walked away. That night, I didn't take the pills. For the first time in weeks, I let my mind be my own. And the memories didn't come all at once. They came in fragments, slipping through the cracks. Every time I skipped a pill, every time I stared at Thomas and felt that something wasn't right. A familiar scent, a stray word, a flash of something in my mind that left me breathless. I played the role of the perfect wife, pretending nothing had changed. But Thomas noticed. He watched me more closely, his touches lingering a little longer, his gaze sharp whenever I hesitated before taking the pill. And one night he said it. "We're going to your parents' house tomorrow," he told me, sliding an arm around my waist. "Amber wants you to be there for her gown fitting. Your parents will be there, too." The words knocked the air from my lungs. My house, my parents. I was going back. I forced myself to smile, nodding like a good wife should. But inside, I was drowning. The next morning as I sat in the car beside Thomas, the memories became clearer. Not forced, not sudden, but they were there like a puzzle assembling itself in my mind. Amber, she had always taken for me. As children, she wanted my toys, my clothes, my friends. And as we grew older, she wanted Scott. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms as more pieces fell into place. Scott and I had been together for 4 years. 4 years of love, of promises, of planning a future together. I had trusted him, believed him, and yet all along, he had been sneaking behind my back with my own sister. I had confronted them. I remembered the way Scott had tried to deny it, how Amber had worn that same sickeningly sweet smile she always did when she got what she wanted. And I had been a fool for thinking that my parents would stand by me, that they would condemn Amber for what she did. But they didn't. They let her have him. They let her take everything from me. The betrayal burned through my veins like poison. And suddenly, I was back in that moment the night of the accident. Amber was in the car with me. We were fighting. I had just found out about Scott. The truth had shattered everything I knew. And I had been furious, screaming, crying, demanding answers. And then the sharp turn, the blinding lights, the impact. It wasn't just an accident. Amber had been there. Amber had caused it. Now she was pretending nothing had happened, pretending she was my sister, my family. The realization clawed at my chest. But I kept my face blank. I let Thomas hold my hand as he led me into my parents' house. And then Amber appeared. Jasmine. Amber's voice rang out overly sweet as she strode toward me, her heels clicking against the floor. Her perfectly styled hair bounced with every step, and her smile stretched wide, too wide.
"Come here.
I want you to meet someone I already knew." Still, I played along, letting her take my hand and drag me forward. "This is Scott," Amber said, practically glowing with pride as she clung to his arm. "My fiancé." I felt the breath leave my lungs. Scott. His eyes met mine, dark and unreadable, but there was something there. Hesitation, discomfort, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. But just as quickly, it was gone. And he extended his hand toward me, his expression unreadable.
"Nice to meet you."
Like I was a stranger. The world tilted. My fingers tingled. And before I even knew what I was doing, I moved like something had taken over my body. I reached out, but instead of shaking his hand, I stepped closer, too close. And then my lips brushed his. Scott stiffened. Amber let out a sharp gasp. "What the hell are you doing kissing my fiancé?" Then she pushed me. "Sorry," I said, awkwardly. "I didn't mean it, but I don't know. I felt like I've known you forever." And the kiss felt like a muscle memory. I paused, looking at Scott with a forced smile, trying to mask how unsettled I felt it. It was crazy, right? Pretending that I didn't know the truth, that I hadn't seen it all coming. Before Scott could answer, Amber, of course, spoke up, cutting through the tension. "Sis," she said, raising an eyebrow, "you're being indifferent. Are you trying to steal my fiancé?" Everyone laughed, even my parents, who didn't seem to notice how much that stung. I could feel my heart drop into my stomach as Amber's words hit me. But then, of course, she added with a sarcastic grin, "Just kidding. Anyway, let's not let this happen again, sister, or we might have to fight." My parents chimed in, too, their voices laced with laughter. "Stop being so flirty, Jasmine," Dad said, shaking his head, while Mom just shot me a smile that barely masked her disapproval. No one even bothered to defend me, not even Scott. "You're embarrassing me." Thomas even whispered to me, "What was that?" "I'm your husband." "Really? Are you?" I stared at him. "Is that the truth?" "What are you saying, Jasmine?" he asked, but I ignored him. I was done with all the lies. The rest of the day went by in a blur. All smiles and false excitement. With Amber fussing over how I looked in the gown, I played along, letting them pretend everything was fine. But the truth was I couldn't focus on anything but the gnawing feeling that had been building inside me. They were all so happy, so carefree. And I was about to lose everything. When I finally excused myself to head back to my room, I did it with the excuse of needing to check for my things. But deep down, I knew I had to go. I wasn't just going to stay here and pretend anymore. But when I got to my room and started to look around, everything was gone. The boxes I had packed, everything was gone. Like they knew I was going to come looking for it. Still, I searched. I had to know. And then I found it. It was hidden inside a shelf, a book wedged between other things. And there it was, a photo of Scott and me. We were kissing, all tangled up with each other. It wasn't just a photo. It was a bookmark, carefully tucked inside the pages like some twisted keepsake. "This is proof. I need this to ruin their wedding." The next day, I went to the doctor to abort the baby. There was no way I'd let this baby be born in a world full of lies. Afterward, I stepped out of the clinic and then remembered my best friend, Alice. So I called her Jasmine. The voice on the other end was surprised, but it was the same voice I hadn't heard in years. "You remember me now?" "Oh, God." "They didn't want you near me, so I had no way to tell the truth to you." "Alice," I said, my voice soft. "Please don't tell anyone that I remember now. But can you help me? I need to leave. I want to take that project you were talking about before. I'm ready now." There was a pause, but Alice didn't hesitate. "Of course you'll leave in 3 days. 3 days. That's all." I had to fake it. I played my part, smiled when I had to, laughed when expected. But Amber made it unbearable. She clung to Scott, kissing him, whispering things in his ear as if I wasn't standing right there. Should have hurt. It didn't. I felt nothing. The only thing I wanted was to leave. Thomas noticed. He pulled me aside, his grip firm on my wrist. "What's wrong with you?" "Nothing," I said flatly. His jaw clenched. "Is this because of Scott?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" He scoffed. "Don't play dumb. You like him, don't you?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I'm your husband, Jasmine." I blinked, then let out a breathless laugh. "You're being ridiculous." His eyes darkened. But before he could say more, I let my expression crumble, forcing a few tears to slip down my cheek. "I'm just confused," I whispered. "My memories are still blurry. Everything feels so strange." Thomas' anger wavered. His hands cupped my face, his thumb brushing against my skin in an attempt to comfort me. I almost gagged. Later, I stood on the balcony, the cold night air doing nothing to cool the simmering rage inside me. Below, the guests laughed and drank, celebrating Amber and Scott's upcoming wedding, like it was the grandest love story ever told. A lie, a sickening, cruel lie. I heard the footsteps before I saw him, Scott. I turned, my lips curling into something almost sweet, leaned against the railing, eyes studying me. "Didn't think I'd find you out here." I tilted my head, pretending to search for something in his face. "It's strange," I murmured. "Every time I see you, I feel like I know you. The wind off the terrace carried the sharp, clean scent of damp boxwood and distant rain. It did nothing to cool the dry heat rising in my throat. Below us, the laughter of the wedding party drifted up in fragmented bursts, accompanied by the clink of expensive crystal. They were celebrating a union built on theft. And here stood the man who had helped seal the locks. Scott did not look at me immediately. He kept his eyes fixed on the manicured gardens below, his hands gripped tightly over the stone railing. The knuckles of his right hand were white. "You shouldn't say things like that, Jasmine," he said, his voice dropping into a register so low it was almost swallowed by the breeze. "You're married. You have Thomas." "Do I?" I tilted my head, studying the sharp line of his jaw. It was the same jawline I had traced 1,000 times in the small apartment we used to share, back when our lives were simple and the future belonged to us. Sometimes I look at him, Scott, and my mind tells me he's my husband, but my chest feels empty, like I'm living in a house where someone else's furniture has been moved. And while I was asleep, Scott's shoulders tensed. He took a slow, deliberate breath, the scent of his cologne, sandalwood and cedar, drifting over to me. It was a sensory trigger so violent that for a second, my knees threatened to buckle. It was the smell of our Sundays. The smell of the jacket he wore when he proposed to me in the rain. "You had a terrible accident," Scott said, his voice tight, almost defensive. "The doctor said your brain is still healing. Memory is a fragile thing. You shouldn't trust these feelings." "And you?" I took a single step closer, close enough to see the slight tremor in his bottom lip. "Should I trust you, Scott? Because when my lips touched yours today, my brain didn't have to do any work at all. My body remembered you. It was like waking up from a dream and realizing the sun was already up." He finally turned to look at me, his dark eyes wide, filled with a volatile mix of panic, guilt, and something that looked dangerously like longing. "Jasmine, don't. Amber is my sister," I interrupted, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the night air. "And she is about to marry you. But why does it feel like I'm the one who is supposed to be standing there in that white dress?" Scott took a half step back, his back hitting the stone balustrade. "You don't know what you're talking about. You're confused. Thomas loves you. He's taken care of you." "Thomas is a jailer who smiles," I said, keeping my voice steady though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "And you are a coward who looks at the floor because you can't bear to meet my eyes." Before he could answer, the glass doors behind us slid open with a sharp, metallic click. "Jasmine." Thomas stood in the doorway, his silhouette blocking the warm light from the drawing room. His eyes darted immediately from me to Scott, his expression hardening into a mask of polite concern that didn't reach his eyes. "There you are," Thomas said, stepping onto the terrace. He walked over to me, his hand finding the small of my back and pressing firmly, too firmly, as if marking his territory. "The air is getting chilly. You shouldn't be out here without a jacket. You know what the doctor said about getting tired." "I was just getting some air, Thomas," I said, forcing my features to soften, letting the sharpness in my eyes dissolve into the vacant, slightly dazed look I had perfected over the last 48 hours. "Scott was just telling me about the wedding preparations." Thomas looked at Scott, his gaze sharp and warning. "Is that so?" Scott cleared his throat, pulling his hands from the railing and tucking them into his pockets. "Yeah. Just catching up. I should get back inside. Amber's probably looking for me." He didn't look at me again as he brushed past Thomas and disappeared into the house. Once we were alone, Thomas's grip on my waist tightened. "What were you two really talking about, Jasmine?" "Nothing," I murmured, leaning slightly against him to play the part of the fragile, dependent wife. "Just trying to remember. But it hurts when I try too hard." Thomas's expression softened instantly, that smug, self-satisfied look returning to his face. He stroked my hair, his fingers lingering near the nape of my neck. "I told you, sweetheart. Don't force it. You have me. I'm all the memory you need." I smiled into his chest, my eyes wide and cold in the darkness. 2 more days, I thought. Just 2 more days. The next morning, the house was a hive of activity. Florists were arriving with crates of white lilies and roses, and the sound of my mother's frantic voice echoed from the foyer as she argued with the caterers. I sat at the vanity in the guest room, watching Thomas sleep through the reflection of the mirror. He looked peaceful, almost innocent, with his arm draped over the side of the bed where I had been lying moments before. It made me sick to think that for weeks I had fallen asleep beside this man, believing his lies, letting him touch me, letting him feed me the very poison that kept my mind locked in a cage. The clinic had been cold. The doctor there had asked no questions, his eyes neutral, accustomed to the quiet tragedies of private rooms. The physical ache in my abdomen was a constant, dull throb, a physical reminder of the choice I had made. It was a dark, heavy thing, but it was mine. I had refused to bring a child into a life built on a foundation of chemical captivity and stolen identities. Thomas would never know. None of them would. Quietly, I stood up and slipped into the hallway. I needed my passport. If I was going to leave with Alice in 48 hours, I couldn't leave my identification behind. Thomas always kept his leather briefcase near the nightstand, but today it wasn't there. I remembered him taking it down to the study the night before. The stairs creaked slightly under my weight as I hurried down to the ground floor. The study was at the end of the hall, past the dining room where my mother was currently directing two maids. I slipped inside the study and closed the heavy oak door behind me, locking it with a silent twist of the wrist. The briefcase was sitting on the corner of the mahogany desk. I tried the latches, locked. My breath caught. I didn't have the key, and I didn't have time to search the house for it. But Thomas was a creature of habit. He used the same 4-digit PIN for everything: his phone, his gym locker, his bank cards. It was his birth year, 1988. I set the dials on the briefcase locks to 1-9-8-8. With a soft, satisfying click, the latches sprang open. I dug through the files, my hand shaking slightly. There were business contracts, tax returns, and then at the very bottom, a thick, yellow manila folder labeled medical. I pulled it out and opened it. Inside were my medical records from the hospital, after the crash, and something else. A series of private prescriptions filled under Thomas's name, but for a drug called lorazepam and another experimental compound used for severe cognitive suppression in trauma patients. Attached to the prescriptions was a typed note on a plain piece of paper, written in Thomas's precise, neat handwriting. Dosage: 2 milligrams daily in evening tea/water. Do not exceed. Keeps the pathways clear of retrieval. Keep her away from S at all costs until after the 14th. The 14th, the day of the wedding. My stomach turned. It was right there, black and white proof of his crime, of his deliberate, systematic drugging of my body to protect my sister's happiness. He hadn't just lied to me. He had chemically lobotomized me to keep me from claiming my own life. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I took rapid, clear photos of every single page, every prescription, and the handwritten note. At the bottom of the folder, I found my passport, along with my birth certificate and my old bank cards, the ones Thomas had told me were lost in the crash. I grabbed them, stuffing them deep into the inner pocket of my coat, hanging by the door. Just as I clicked the briefcase shut and scrambled the dials, I heard footsteps approaching the study door. The handle jingled. "Jasmine, are you in there?" Thomas's voice was muffled through the heavy wood. I quickly unlocked the door and pulled it open, holding a heavy leather-bound book I had grabbed from the shelf at random. I forced a sheepish, slightly confused smile onto my face. "Thomas," I said, blinking as if the light hurt my eyes. "I was just looking for something to read." My head was hurting again, and I thought maybe some quiet time. Thomas looked past me, his eyes instantly tracking to his briefcase on the desk. He walked over to it, his hand brushing the leather as if checking to see if it had been disturbed. He turned back to me, his expression unreadable before stepping close and wrapping his arms around my shoulders. "You should have asked me, sweetheart," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "I don't want you wandering around the house alone. You might get confused. Again. Come back upstairs. It's time for your morning tea." "Of course," I murmured, burying my face in his shoulder, so he wouldn't see the raw, murderous hatred burning in my eyes. "Thank you, Thomas." The venue for the rehearsal dinner was an exclusive restaurant overlooking the river. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of roasted garlic, expensive red wine, and hypocrisy. Amber was in her element. She wore a crimson silk dress that clung to her curves, her laughter ringing out across the private dining room like glass shattering on marble. She sat next to Scott, her hand draped possessively over his forearm, her diamond engagement ring catching the light of the chandeliers. With every gesture, I sat opposite them, with Thomas on my right and my parents on my left. We are just so incredibly blessed, my mother said, raising her glass of champagne. Her eyes skipped over me entirely, landing on Amber with a warmth she had never once directed my way. To see our beautiful Amber marrying the man of her dreams. It's everything we could have hoped for. To Amber and Scott, the table murmured in unison. I raised my glass, my eyes locked on Scott. He was looking at his plate, his fingers tight around the stem of his wine glass. He hadn't looked at me once since we sat down. Jasmine, darling, Amber said, her voice dripping with that familiar, sickening sweetness. You're so quiet tonight. Is the food not to your liking? Or is your head still foggy? The table fell silent. My mother paused, her wine glass halfway to her lips, her expression tightening with mild irritation at the reminder of my presence. My head is actually very clear tonight, Amber, I said, letting a slow, calm smile spread across my face. Clearer than it has been in weeks, actually. Thomas's hand instantly found my thigh under the table, his fingers digging in with a subtle, warning pressure. Jasmine is doing much better, he intervened quickly. But she still needs her rest. We probably won't stay too late. Oh, don't be a party pooper, Thomas, Amber laughed, leaning forward, her eyes gleaming with a malicious playfulness. We're family. And besides, I want Jasmine to be fully present tomorrow. After all, she's my only sister. I need her to see exactly what she missed out on. A few of the distant relatives at the table laughed nervously, assuming it was a joke. But the air between us turned ice cold. I wouldn't miss it for the world, Amber, I said, my voice smooth as silk. I want to see every single detail. I want to make sure everyone gets exactly what they deserve. Scott's head snapped up. His eyes met mine, wide with a sudden, sharp panic. He knew. Or at least, he was beginning to suspect that the quiet, compliant ghost Thomas had been keeping in his house was starting to fade. After dinner, as the guests began to mingle and drink, I excused myself to the ladies' room. I stood in front of the mirror, washing my hands in the cool water, trying to soothe the burning rage that threatened to spill over before the time was right. The door swung open, and Amber stepped inside. She let the door click shut behind her and leaned against the counter, her arms crossed over her chest. The sweet, sisterly act was gone. Her eyes were hard, her mouth set in a thin, bitter line. What do you think you're doing, Jasmine? She demanded, her voice low and sharp. I'm washing my hands, Amber, I said, not looking at her, keeping my focus on the water running over my fingers. Don't play stupid with me. That little stunt yesterday, kissing Scott? And the creepy comments tonight? You think because you had an accident everyone is going to pity you forever? You think you can just slide back into his life? I turned off the tap, took a paper towel, and dried my hands with deliberate slowness. Finally, I turned to face her. You're very insecure for a bride, Amber, I said softly. If Scott loves you so much, why are you so terrified of a girl who can barely remember her own phone number? Amber took a step closer, her face contorting with anger. Listen to me, you pathetic little leech. Scott is mine. He chose me. He was sleeping with me while he was still living in your apartment, buying your groceries, and pretending to love you. You were a boring, predictable chore to him. I gave him excitement. I gave him a family that actually cares about him. You lost. You lost him, you lost your mind, and if you try to ruin tomorrow, I will make sure Thomas puts you in a place where no one will ever have to look at your miserable face again. I didn't flinch. I let her words wash over me, storing them away, letting them fuel the cold fire in my chest. You really think he chose you? I whispered, stepping closer to her, so close I could see the tiny cracks in her heavy makeup. Or did you just take him because he was mine? Because that's what you do, isn't it? You take my toys, my clothes, my fiancé, and when I finally call you out on it, you run me off the road. Amber froze. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale beneath her blush. What did you say? The night of the crash, Amber, I said, my voice a deadly, quiet purr. We were in the car. We were screaming at each other. You grabbed the wheel because you couldn't stand that I finally saw you for the monster you are. You tried to kill me. You don't remember that, she stammered, her voice shaking, her hands gripping the edge of the sink. The doctors said, Thomas said. Thomas is a liar, and so are you, I said, leaning in until my lips were inches from her ear. But don't worry, sister. I'm not going to stop your wedding. In fact, I'm going to make sure it's a day none of us will ever forget. I patted her cheek, her skin cold under my hand, and walked out of the restroom, leaving her staring at her own terrified reflection. The night before the wedding was suffocating. We were staying at my parents' estate, where the ceremony was to take place in the grand gardens the following afternoon. Thomas was waiting for me in our guest room. He had a glass of warm water and a small white pill sitting on the nightstand. His face was tense, his usual calm demeanor frayed by the events of the evening. "You rattled Amber tonight," Thomas said, his voice quiet but laced with an undercurrent of menace. She was shaking when she came out of the restroom.
"What
did you say to her, Jasmine?" "Nothing," I said, sitting on the edge of the bed and kicking off my shoes.
I
"Think she's just stressed about the wedding. Brides get nervous, don't they?" Thomas walked over to me, grabbing my chin with his fingers and forcing me to look up at him. His grip was tight enough to bruise. "I've spent the last month protecting you, Jasmine, keeping you safe, keeping you comfortable. But you've been acting strange ever since you went to my office. If you're keeping secrets from me, if you're trying to cause trouble—" "I'm not, Thomas," I whimpered, letting my eyes fill with tears. "I swear,
I'm
just so tired. My head, it feels like it's on fire. I just want to sleep." He stared at me for a long, agonizing moment, searching my face for any sign of deceit. Finally, his grip relaxed. He picked up the pill from the nightstand and handed it to me, along with the glass of water. "Take your medicine," he ordered. "It will make the pain go away. And tomorrow, you will smile, you will stand by your sister, and you will be the perfect wife. Do you understand?" "Yes, Thomas," I whispered. I placed the pill in my mouth, took a large gulp of water, and swallowed. I let him watch the muscles in my throat move. "Good girl," he said, kissing my forehead before turning to go into the master bathroom to brush his teeth. The moment the bathroom door closed and the water began to run, I spat the pill into my hand. It was already half dissolved, leaving a bitter, chemical paste on my tongue. I ran to the window, opened it quietly, and threw the remains into the bushes below, rinsing my mouth with the remaining water from the glass and spitting it out the window as well. I lay down on the bed, my heart racing. One more day. A few hours later, when the house had fallen completely silent and the only sound was Thomas's heavy, rhythmic breathing beside me, I slipped out of bed.
I
Grabbed my phone and my coat, stepping out of the room with the silence of a
ghost.
I needed to see Alice. We had agreed to meet at the old stone bridge at the edge of my parents' property at midnight to finalize the escape plan. The night air was freezing, biting through my thin silk pajamas. I wrapped my coat tightly around myself as I hurried down the dark gravel path toward the
Bridge.
The moon was a sharp, silver crescent, casting long, skeletal shadows through the willow trees. As I approached the bridge, I saw a figure standing there, leaning against the
Stone.
But as I got closer, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't Alice. It was Scott. He was holding a half-empty bottle of whiskey, his tie loosened, his hair messy. He looked up as my footsteps crunched on the gravel, his eyes bloodshot and heavy. "Jasmine," he breathed, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I hoped you'd
Come out.
You used to come here when you couldn't sleep." I stopped a few feet away from him, my hands buried deep in my pockets.
You
"Shouldn't be here, Scott. You're getting married tomorrow." "Am I?" He took a swig from the bottle, his voice thick with alcohol and regret. "Is that what I'm doing? Because every time I look at Amber, all I see is what I did to you. Every time she touches me, I feel like a criminal." "You are a criminal," I said coldly. "You cheated on me with my sister for months. You watched me break, and then, when I almost died, you let them drug me and lock me away just so you could have your perfect little wedding." Scott shook his head, tears spilling down his cheeks.
I didn't know about the
"Drugs, Jasmine. I swear to God, I didn't know what Thomas was doing.
I
Thought they told me you were happy. They told me you didn't remember anything and that it was better this way. That if you remembered, it would kill you. And you believed them because it was easier," I said, my voice cutting through his tears like a knife. "It excused your guilt. It let you play the happy groom, without having to look at the wreckage you left behind." "I love you," he sobbed, taking a step toward me, reaching out a hand.
I've
"Never stopped loving you, Jasmine. Amber, she was a mistake. A horrible, selfish mistake. Please tell me it's not too late. We can run away. We can leave this place tonight. Just tell me you remember." I looked at his outstretched hand. Once, I would have given my life to hear those words. Once, he was my entire world. But looking at him now, blubbering and pathetic under the moonlight, I felt nothing but a profound, hollow disgust. He didn't want to save me. He wanted me to save him from the consequences of his own choices. I remember everything, Scott, I whispered. His eyes lit up with a desperate hope. Jasmine, I remember the way you looked at me when we bought our first apartment. I continued, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. And I remember the way you looked at Amber at the dinner table tonight. You chose her, Scott. You chose the lies. You chose the greed. And you chose the sister who tried to murder me. His hand dropped to his side.
What?
The crash wasn't an accident, I said. Amber drove us off the road because I found out about the two of you. And tomorrow, you're going to marry her. You deserve each other. Before he could speak, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from Alice. I'm at the main gate. Car is running. Are you ready? I looked at Scott one last time. Have a beautiful wedding, Scott. I'll see you at the altar. I turned and walked away, leaving him alone in the dark, weeping into his whiskey bottle. The afternoon sun was blindingly bright, casting a golden hue over the rolling lawns of my parents' estate. White silk runners lined the grass, and 200 guests sat in elegant white chairs, their low chatter mixing with the gentle strains of a string quartet. In the bride's dressing room, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Amber stood before the full-length mirror, a vision of lace and tulle. But her face was pale beneath her heavy makeup, her fingers twitching against her bouquet of white roses. My mother was busy adjusting Amber's veil, humming happily. Just perfect, she
Sighed.
My beautiful girl. I stood in the corner, wearing the pale peach bridesmaid dress they had chosen for me. I looked at myself in the glass. I looked calm, peaceful, even.
The
physical emptiness in my body was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. The door opened, and Thomas stepped in, wearing a sharp tuxedo. He smiled warmly at my mother, then walked over to me, wrapping his arm around my waist. How is my beautiful wife feeling? He murmured, his hand sliding down to squeeze my hip. I'm wonderful, Thomas, I said, smiling up at him. Never better. Good, he whispered, his eyes narrowing slightly. Because today is about Amber. Let's make sure nothing ruins her day. Of course, I replied. Just then, my father entered the room, his chest puffed out with pride.
It's
time, everyone. The guests are seated. Scott is at the altar. Amber took a sharp, shaky breath. She looked at me through the mirror, her eyes pleading, terrified of what I might do. I simply smiled back, a polite, vacant, sisterly smile. As we walked down the grand staircase and out toward the garden, the music swelled. The crowd stood, their faces turning toward the bride. I walked ahead of Amber, my feet moving in perfect rhythm on the white silk runner. I looked ahead at the altar. Scott stood there, looking utterly hollow. His skin was gray, his eyes bloodshot, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He looked like a man marching to the gallows. When his eyes met mine, a tremor went through his entire body. I took my place at the front, turning to face the crowd. Thomas stood a few yards away, watching me like a hawk, his hands folded neatly. Amber began her walk down the aisle, clinging to my father's arm. The guests cooed and whispered of her beauty. It was a picture-perfect scene. Then, they reached the altar. My father handed Amber over to Scott. Scott took her hands, but his touch was limp, his gaze fixed stubbornly on the ground. The minister cleared his throat and began the ceremony. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. I reached into the small silk clutch I was holding. My hand closed around my phone. Before the minister could reach the vows, I stepped forward. The music had stopped, and the only sound was the rustle of the wind through the trees. My sudden movement drew sharp, confused glances from my parents and Thomas. Thomas made a subtle gesture, stepping toward me, his brow furrowed in warning. Excuse me, I said, my voice clear and loud, echoing through the microphone. Stand near the altar. The minister paused, blinking in surprise. Yes, child. Before we proceed, I said, looking out at the crowd of 200 of my family's wealthiest and most influential friends, I would like to offer a gift to the bride and groom, a tribute to their beautiful, honest love. Jasmine, sit down. My mother hissed from the front row, her face turning a deep, angry red. Thomas took a step toward me, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Jasmine, stop.
This. Now.
You're confused. I'm not confused anymore, Thomas, I said, turning my gaze to him. I felt no fear, only a profound, liberating disgust. In fact, I've never been more sober in my life. I tapped my phone screen. I had pre-programmed it to connect to the giant LED screen behind the altar, the one my mother had set up to show a slideshow of Amber and Scott's childhood photos later during the reception. With a single swipe, the screen flickered to life. But it wasn't a childhood photo. It was a high-resolution image of the medical records I had photographed in Thomas's briefcase, the prescription for the cognitive suppressants, the lorazepam, and Thomas's handwritten note, keep her away from S, at all costs, until after the 14th. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Whispers broke out, a low, rising tide of confusion and shock. What is the meaning of this? My father roared, standing up from his seat. That, I said, pointing to the screen, is proof of how my husband, Thomas, and my family have been systematically drugging me for the last month. They wanted to make sure I wouldn't remember that my sister, Amber, was sleeping with my fiancé, Scott, for over a year. Jasmine, shut up. Amber screamed, dropping her bouquet. She lunged toward me, but Scott caught her arm, his face completely blank, as if he had already accepted his doom. And that's not all, I continued, my voice steady, rising above the chaos.
I
swiped the screen again. An old photo of Scott and me appeared, the one I had found hidden in my room.
We
were kissing, happy, alive. Scott and I were together for 4 years, I said. We were engaged. But Amber wanted him. And when I finally confronted her about their betrayal on the night of my accident, she didn't apologize. We fought in the car. She grabbed the wheel. She drove us off the road to keep her secret from getting out. That's a lie. Amber shrieked, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. She's crazy. She's brain damaged. Thomas, do something. Thomas lunged forward, his face contorted in a mask of pure, vicious rage. He grabbed my wrist, twisting it painfully. You're coming with me, he snarled. We're going to the hospital right now. But I didn't flinch. I looked him dead in the eye and raised my other hand, which held a small, voice-activated recorder. I wouldn't touch me if I were you, Thomas, I said, my voice echoing through the speakers. I pressed play. So, are you going to keep pretending to be her husband? The voice of Thomas's friend filled the garden, loud and crystal clear. They won't. She's been drinking the pills. I made sure she wouldn't. Remember, even if Amber didn't choose me, even if she married someone else, I still can't let anyone destroy her happiness. So if I have to live my life with her, I'll do it for Amber. The silence that followed was absolute. Thomas froze, his grip on my wrist slipping away. His face drained of all color. He looked around at the guests, who were staring at him with expressions of horror and disgust. My parents looked as if they had been struck by lightning. My mother sank back into her chair, her hand over her mouth, while my father stared at the screen, his chest heaving, unable to find words to defend his golden child. I looked at Amber, who was sobbing uncontrollably, clutching her lace dress. I looked at Scott, who simply closed his eyes, a tear rolling down his cheek as he let go of Amber's hand and stepped away from her, completely broken. You wanted a perfect wedding, Amber, I said softly, my voice carrying over the quiet weeping of my sister. You wanted to take everything I had. Well, now you have him. And everyone knows exactly what you did to get him. I turned my back on the altar, on my family, on the man who had pretended to be my husband, and on the man who had broken my heart. I walked down the aisle, the silk runner smooth beneath my feet. The guests parted for me like the Red Sea, their faces filled with awe, pity, and shock. I didn't look back. The iron gates of the estate swung closed behind me, a heavy, metallic finality that echoed in the quiet afternoon air. A sleek black sedan was idling at the curb, its hazard lights blinking. As I approached, the passenger door swung open. Alice was sitting in the driver's seat. She didn't say a word. She just looked at me, her eyes filled with a fierce, protective warmth. She reached over and handed me a quiet, steaming cup of chamomile tea, real tea, clean tea. You ready? She asked softly. I climbed into the passenger seat, pulling my coat tightly around myself, and shut the door, sealing out the sounds of the shouting that was undoubtedly still echoing through my parents' gardens. I've never been more ready, I said. Alice put the car in drive, and we pulled away from the curb, heading toward the highway, toward the airport, toward a life that was entirely, beautifully my
Own.
As the estate faded into the distance in the rearview mirror, I took a deep
Breath.
My mind was quiet. The pain in my head was gone, replaced by the cool, clean wash of freedom. I had no husband. I had no fiancé. I had no family. But as I watched the trees blur past against the gray afternoon sky, I smiled. For the first time in my life, I had myself. And that was more than enough.